So you don't vote. Why is that the case?
The last person that went into Parliament with honest intentions was Guy Fawkes.
Wow.
I genuinely believe that economic elites have more influence on politics than the average voter. And for that reason, I don't vote. I definitely understand the perspective of voting is a privilege. We haven't always been able to do it. So therefore, you should do it out of respect for those who couldn't before you, which is great. But people weren't fighting for the ability to go in to a ballot box and tick a box. They were voting for the actual power, or they were fighting for the actual power that voting brings. So as soon as that power is removed from the vote, in my mind, the vote is redundant. And for that reason, I don't.
But who says that power has been removed from the vote in your case?
So, in my opinion, so the power being removed from the vote is would just be my opinion. But I think, in my mind, that comes from, for example, in the US, the book I got this from was written in 2014. So this is up to 2014.
Yeah.
The party that won the general election, every single time since this was recorded, it was the party that spent the most on their campaign. Every single time. So in that case, we could have just gone, okay, how much are you spending this year? How much are you spending this year? Oh, great, we'll just go with you. And the same outcome would have came about.
Do you think that's just a coincidence?
Every single time.
Is that a far-fetched reason?
But if every single time, I can't even throw a bit of paper into the bin every single time, let alone an electoral campaign for decades. But convince me, why should I vote? Why am I a bad citizen?
Before I convince you, just one last question.
Yeah.
If everyone had the mindset that you had in terms of having that vote available to them but not taking it because they felt like power had been lost.
Yeah.
If everyone had that mindset, surely no change would be made.
But it depends.
Yeah.
If it's true or not. If it's true, then people should do what I'm doing, because then at that point, something would have to change.
Right.
If we live in a democracy and no one's voting, then there's a disconnect that would need to be addressed at some point. But, and obviously I think I'm right. But that's obviously so unlikely for everyone to just stop voting.
Right.
And I'd hope we can find some solutions to at least heal politics before we get to that point. But I think what's more dangerous is having zero, criticisms, or I guess zero analysis of the way the vote is at the moment, and just assume that because we can go in and tick a box, that's actually going somewhere. And I think if we all assume that that's always going to be the case, and we get to a point where 100% of people are voting, but it's meaningless, then all we are is deceived. We're not empowered. Do you see what I'm trying to say? So I think the biggest question is whether economic elites do really control government. And I think throughout the pandemic, that's where I really became wise to it. I thought you saw the way, I don't know how much, but I won't say too much. But in terms of vaccines, you look at the way big pharmaceutical companies, how there were so many billionaires created in that whole pandemic while people were struggling, and how that affected US policy with the companies that were rolling out these vaccines. The two big groups that aren't trusted in society, these are two examples of it, are government and big pharma, because of things like, because the recent antidepressant thing where there was no evidence of being a chemical imbalance for depression, and how that was pushed by big pharmaceutical companies, how cigarettes were healthy once upon a time, not that long ago. These are reasons why people don't trust big pharma, and government. That laundry list is even longer. And those two people came together with a project throughout the pandemic and reeled it off to society, and there were no questions. And this is where I'm thinking, hold on, something must have gone wrong here. You know what I'm saying?
I understand. Okay, well,
Convince me.
I'll convince you. I'll tell you why you need to vote. Essentially, the first reason why you need to vote is because it's a civic duty. So as a citizen of a society, you have a duty to vote. And the reason why you vote is so that you can see the change that that will be beneficial for you and your community. So I feel like one of your points were that you don't see change because there's elites at the top, hence why should I vote? First of all, for you to see change, you have to innately and inherently believe it for yourself. You need to believe the change you want to see. So for me, that's not an adequate reason for why you shouldn't vote. Like, just because you don't see change, oh, I shouldn't vote, or I should revoke my civic duty to vote. For me, that's not really a convincing reason. But nonetheless, you need to vote, because if you want to see change, you've got to be fair, hold that thought. Let's look at society and our communities in general. If each and every one of us voted and we all had the same aim, let's take poverty, for example, we all had the same aim to alleviate poverty, and we know that this leader can do it with this party. Keir Starmer could do it with the Labour Party. Of course you would vote, because that change that you want to see, you believe it can happen. So you should vote. It just seems like a logical thing to do. I would think that it was people's intuition to vote.
Well, that's what we're encouraged to from a young age. And I think the theory is exactly that. It's, well, no, we live in a democracy where it's the will of the people and my vote counts, and we can make real change and affect our society. That's the theory. And I think if I lived in a textbook, I'd be ecstatic. But I think if, like I said before, if the power from voting is removed from voting, there is no vote. I'm sure your civic duty would change if you knew that after everyone had voted, they scrunch up all the bits of paper and throw them away in the bin, and I'm sure you wouldn't. The civic duty would be off the table at that point, because it would be.
I don't think it would.
So you'd still want people to vote, even if at the end they didn't take it. They didn't count the votes. They just thought, okay, let's just chuck it.
Yeah, because to be fair, you're hinting at like democratic backsliding. So you're saying, because voting is essential to live in a democracy, right?
Yeah,
it's part of the factors that make up a democracy.
Yeah.
So you're saying that if you don't see change, you should essentially remove this factor of being a democracy so that we can see change. It doesn't seem logical.
So what I'm trying to say is, before we even get to the change bit, we haven't even got, so if we just purely base it on voting, the act of voting, going into a ballot box, and the impact and the power that voting holds, in other words, the weight of one vote, or the number of how many votes that get people into power, right?
Yeah.
Just as a hypothetical, if after everyone had voted, before it was shipped to wherever they're shipped to, they just chuck them, would that affect your civic duty? So bear in mind...
Would the people know? Would we know?
No.
Exactly. That's the whole point.
But as in... is there not a problem with... And I want to check you 100%, see what I'm trying to say here. That the votes never even are counted, or... So we still have a system running, but the votes are never even counted or used in the political process.
Yeah.
But would that affect your willingness to vote?
Exactly. That's why I asked, do they know? Because it wouldn't affect me and my ability to vote if I didn't know that it was being chucked away.
But as in, sorry, so for the sake of this thought experiment, I'm going to assume not everyone in the country knows that the votes are being chucked away. But I'm saying if you personally knew,
if I knew.
Because I know your civic duty, let's vote. So just for the sake of this, because I know if everyone knew it wasn't going to vote, there probably wouldn't be enough people.
The experiment wouldn't work on me, because if I didn't know, it wouldn't affect like my decision to vote. But even if I knew, it still wouldn't affect my decision to vote. And this is just speaking for me personally, because I think that voting goes beyond simply putting a paper into a ballot box.
Right.
Voting, I vote because I want to see change. So if I'm constantly thinking that I will see change, it naturally follows that I will continue to vote, even if I don't see the change that I want to see right now.
Okay.
Because I believe it will come in the future.
Okay.
Hence, I continue to vote.
Okay.
You understand? But that's in my case.
Okay, I think I get what you're saying. I think I probably explained it poorly, but essentially, and the last thing I say on this particular thing is, if change is down here and the ballot box is down here, there's like 5 different steps to get here.
Yeah.
And all I'm saying is, from within step 1, there's the vote being counted and making an impact on the election. But if those two things are removed and it's okay, you write a thing in a box, we chuck the ballots, and then, you know, we roll a dice to see who's in power next.
Yeah.
Then because the power of voting is removed,
Right.
some may see it as now useless. But I was just trying to make the point that because it's a civic duty, you still think it would be important to vote in that case.
Yeah, 100%.
And that, fair enough.
To be fair, I see your point. I see where you're coming from. But what you're trying to propose in terms of like not voting because there's no effective change, it doesn't seem to be a better solution to trying to see change. That's what I'm trying to say. So I would rather continue to vote rather than just saying, okay, I will just abandon my civic duty just because I don't see change.
Right.
So if you were to like, okay, say I don't vote, but here's a solution in terms of how we can better the vote. Yeah. Like that would be more convincing, I guess, because what it comes across is that, okay, we should live in an anarchy, essentially.
So let's not make it, because I don't think we should live in an anarchy. I'm still pro-democracy. I'm pro the vote.
Cool.
My issue with the vote is that it's lost its power.
Okay.
And the power vacuum has been taken by economic elites, or in other words, the economic elites have come in and taken away the vote's power.
Yeah.
And so my solution, in theory, would be to remove power from big corporations and put it back into people.
Right.
But I don't want to I'm pro-democracy. I'm even pro-capitalist.
Okay.
The way in which these things are currently used, I massively disagree with.
Okay, that's a fair point. But do you know what? You said that voting has lost its power.
Yeah.
But I guess the perspective that I'm trying to adopt is that power hasn't actually been lost in the voting process. You have lost your ability to believe in voting.
Okay.
So what I'm trying to say is that, okay, I understand your reasonings for not voting. However, if we continue to vote, but at the same time address that, there's elites who are overriding these votes, then we can bring about change. But voting in itself should be here to stay, essentially.
Okay.
What do you think about that?
I get what you're saying. But I think it would always come back to the whole economic thing. But let me give you a real life example outside of the hypothetical that might explain my position a bit better. But think about the cannabis industry. In the UK, cannabis is illegal, but the UK is also one of the world's largest cannabis exporters around the world. You could go to Canada and smoke UK stuff, but that you can't have in the UK. For example, in the US, it's obviously state by state. In many states, cannabis is illegal to the point where there are more people in prison in the US for cannabis than all other violent crimes put together. Now, in the US, there are multiple patents for the medical use of marijuana, right? But it's classed as a Schedule 1 drug, which means that it's by definition cannot have any medical uses. But do you know who owns the majority of the patents for medical marijuana in the US? The US government.
Okay. And
they make a lot of money through these patents when cannabis is rolled out in medical fashion, which is virtually every state. So anytime these patents are coming into question, the US government is earning some sort of money, or it's satisfying some sort of economic elite, even though the vote is, even though at the same time it's illegal. So there's this space between what the people want, which is often voted, for example, that for the recreational use of cannabis, for example, and what the government wants, which is to keep it illegal to make sure they keep making money. It's the same in the UK. There's been politicians that have been made millionaires through the export of legal, cannabis consumption, exportation even. But then for the people, it's still illegal. You see what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, I totally understand how that ties into like voting and people voting to legalize cannabis, was it? And the government still using it for economic purposes. Yeah. At the end of the day, I'm a believer that the government knows best for the people. So if they've clearly not supported people voting to legalize cannabis, it's for the greater good. And I'd expect and assume that the government is meant to act in the greatest good for the public. So I don't feel like that's a point that hinders voting.
Yeah, fair enough. I think it always comes down to that. It's the root thing of, I think, whether we trust government or not. And I think that's where we disagree.
Right. Do you trust
respect,
the government?
Not in the slightest.
Oh.
Yeah. But I think that's what it all comes down to. And it's just going to be expression of that one value point. But
Yeah, makes sense.
Fair enough.
Hey, thank you for taking time to watch that video. Here at the Common Sense Network, we thrive on exposing you to different ideas. If you're someone who likes ideas, you like learning new things, hit the subscribe button now and turn on notifications so you're first to hear when we have a new video out.